As President Shavkat Mirziyoyev declared recently to an assembly of teachers and educators, Uzbekistan is preparing a third renaissance through the development of high education and suggests to the new generations to get inspiration from the spiritual and scientific heritage from their ancestors. The third Renaissance would be certainly inspired by the two previous ones. The first one occurred in the Middle Ages, between the 9th and the 12th century, with actors that included outstanding intellectual encyclopedists, scientists, writers, thinkers, philosophers, poets, religious figures. And just to give a few names, because that's well known, Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Biruni, Al-Biruni, Al-Bukhari, and so on. So the second one is called the Timurid Renaissance. In my eyes, this is the brightest period of the history from Uzbekistan, spanning from the beginning of the 15th century to the beginning of the 16th century. It is interesting that we use the French word Renaissance, which means literally rebirth. And in this case, we can talk about cultural revival. Actually, this movement in Uzbekistan was simultaneous with the Renaissance in Europe and has been often described as being equal of glory to the Quattrocento in Firenze. This Timurid Renaissance reached its peak in the 15th century in two major cities, first Samarkand and then Herat, who was the capital of the Timurid Empire at that period. The main figures of this artistic renaissance are Timur's descendant, Ulugh Beg in Samarkand, and in Herat, Shahrukh and his wife Gawar Shad, the prince Baysangar, their son, and principally Sultan Hossein Baykara, where in Herat at that period there was an exceptional florescence which took place the three last decades of the 15th century. Later, at the beginning of the 16th century, this artistic movement went on in northern India under the influence of the Prince Babur, who became the first Mughal emperor and who embraced Timurid legitimacy and consciously presided over a Timurid renaissance in India, in northern India. The Timurid Renaissance in Samarkand. Ulugh Beg, Timur's grandson, is the one who inaugurated the Timurid Renaissance in Samarkand, where he reigned about 40 years as an enlightened prince. More interested in sciences than in military conquest, he surrounded himself with scientists, wise men, artists, and poets who he pensioned generously. He built his grandiose madrasa on the Registan in 1420, which became the great university of Central Asia in the 15th century and which was very famous through the Islamic world. It attracted many students. It was known for the quality of the teaching, especially in astronomy, mathematics, literature, poetry, and theology. This ruler was extremely modern, and the access to knowledge and excellence of education was crucial for him. And thanks to his politics, Samarkand became a famous center of learning, attracting many students from the whole Islamic world. Ulugh Beg chose the best scientists to teach in the madrasa. And, for example, just a few names, Al-Karshik, Azizadeh Rumi, and many others. He built an observatory in 1428 with Al-Kashi as an architect, and the huge sextant in the middle of a cylindric shaped building was the biggest, the greatest of the time. Ulugh Beg was recognized as the most important astronomer in the 15th century. He was working with a very big team of astronomers, mathematicians. They were discussing, and together they found many new discoveries and invented many new instruments. Sciences at that period reached then an unprecedented peak and Samarkand became the capital of sciences, renowned in the whole world. Ulugh Beg's compilation of the 30 years of observation were in a book, the Zi Gurgani. It was really the work of his life, he finished just before he died. And it's truly an extraordinary achievement, that book. And it was used during 3 centuries in astronomy. The Timurid Renaissance in Herat now. Shah Rukh and his wife Gawashad led both a cultural renaissance by the patronage of the arts, attracting to the court a real elite, architects, philosophers, painters, poets, and in particular one of the most famous poets, Jami. Shah Rukh, Royal Khitab Khane, and the school of miniature painting that flourished there was very important and famous. Many precious illuminated manuscripts were commissioned by Shah Rukh, and for example the Mirage-Nameh, which is by the way at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and his wife Gawashad, which was the queen. She was very, very influential, and she was also a lavish patron of arts. She was very keen in architecture, and she worked with the architect Khavam Uddin, who built for her very magnificent buildings, madrasa, both religious and public buildings. The madrasa complex, the Masala complex in Herat, also a big complex with elegant architecture and elegant decoration also. And also in Mashhad, not only in Herat, she was very active in Mashhad, where she asked madrasa in the Imam Reza complex. And it became a very famous place for pilgrimage. Under her patronage, Persian language and culture became predominant also. Their son, the Prince Baysangor, was known also as a patron of arts and architecture. He was himself an excellent calligrapher. He brought back from Tabriz excellent painters from that school and excellent calligraphers also, and commissioned a famous manuscript by Sangor Shahnameh, which has illuminated with absolutely exquisite miniatures in 1430. The cultural revival in Herat, which is peak in the last decades of the 15th century, under the reign of the last Timorese prince, Hossein Baykara, who oriented his governance nearly exclusively toward artistic and humanitarian development. This was a very peaceful reign at that period. The patronage of arts became for the Sultan, a full-time activity of government. And he was himself a poet and also a philanthropist, a very talented calligrapher also, and a poet. At his court, a sophisticated elite participated in cultural life. Several figures, Mir Ali Shernavahi, the Persian poet Jami, already mentioned, and the great painter, the genius Behzad, played a major role in the Timurid Renaissance and in the development of patronage. Mir Ali Shernavahi, poet, writer, politician, advisor to Sultan Hossein Baikara, great patron of arts and letters, builder of religious and secular buildings, and also, last but not least, the greatest representative of Jagatai language, and actually the founder of the Jagatai, classical Jagatai literature. He was extremely active under Hossein Baikara reign. This cultural renaissance made it possible to develop at the court this Jagatai Turkic language as a literary language, as Persian was then prevailing at that time. So this was very innovative to impose, in a way, this new language. The third figure is the painter, as I say, the genius painter Behzad, who marks actually the pinnacle of the art of miniature in Timurid era. He was able to translate artistically the inner world and hidden meaning of Sufi text, for example, the text of Jami. And the Jami held him in a very, very big esteem for that. So they were collaborating very closely, Behzad and Jami. The atmosphere of spiritual quest prevailing at the court certainly established deep levels of understanding between these three major figures. Hossein Baikara, first the ruler, Jami, Ali Shernavahi, and Behzad. It was a kind of, circle, inner circle, and it worked very, very well for the artistic development. So the atmosphere of spiritual quest prevailing at Hossein Baikara court certainly established deep level of understanding between these three major figures, Ali Shernavahi, Jami, and Behzad, with their patron Hossein Baikara, creating the perfect conditions for a golden age. And actually that period is the absolute golden age of Timurid era. So thank you. There is much to say, of course, but I will conclude my talk now. Looking forward to our future meeting and cultural exchanges, and thank you for your attention. And may this bright Timurid Renaissance inspire a third Renaissance in contemporary Uzbekistan. Thanks to the President Shavkat Mirziyoyev.